بسم الله الرحمن الرحیم الحمد لله رب العالمین و صلی الله علی محمد و اهل بیت طیبین الطاهرین. Dear viewers, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I hope that you're at the best form and mood and health, and I hope that also these sessions that we are talking about the skills of communications and also the communication itself, the process of communication, can be beneficial for you. In the previous discussions, we talked about different issues in the communication. We had the definition of the communication, the process of communication, the levels of communication, the 4 types of communications, the information richness, and also we started a new chapter and episode in our speech about and our sessions about the characteristics of effective communications. In our previous session, we started from the characteristics of a message, which must be, for example, clear, concise, and accurate, meaningful, on time, according to the situation of the receiver and also according to the needs of the receiver. Today, we are going to talk about the characteristics of effective communication in a sender. A sender, who is the pivotal stone of a communication and the initializer of a communication, must be mastered in some techniques, which is very important, and it determines the efficiency of your communication. If the sender starts the communication and the process of communication very knowledgeably according to the key points and the skills and the art of communication, so the process of communication will be complete and the M and M prime will be equal with 1. But if not, okay, in that case, the process of the communication will have some noises, some barriers, and some obstacles. Now, what are the characteristics of a good sender? A good sender is a sender who knows the subject well. This is very important, that the sender must know the subject, what is he or she is talking about. Okay, if you are not enough mastered in the subject that you are offering, okay, the process of communication will be problematic and will be in dilemma. I mean, for example, you are talking to a group of university professors. You start a communication, you start a subject that you are not mastered in. For example, you are Muslim. You start a subject about Jesus the Christ with some priests. And you don't know what does this include, this spectrum of the subject about Jesus the Christ, for example. Peace be upon him. So, when you start this subject, since you don't know the subject well, or you are not mastered, immediately after the initializing point, you will be rejected. Your subject and your speech and your comments will be rejected. And this will not be effective and influential. You must be mastered in a subject and enter to a subject at the best form, and you guide the discussion, you guide the argument. This is one example of the knowing the subject well, which is one of the elements of a good sender. For example, you are writing about a PhD dissertation, you are writing about a paper. You have to know that to whom you are talking to this article. If it is the article for the public, okay, it can be in any form or it can be in any standard of lecturing or writing a paper. But if you are writing an article which is scientific, which is according to the academic situation, you have to, for example, be mastered in APA form of writing, in ISI, or I don't know, different standards, okay, which are very important in the issue of writing an article. So knowing the subject, if you know the subject and if you know the forms at the best level, so the process of communication will be complete. The second point in the issue of the as a matter of fact, effective communication, the sender must be interested in the subject. Sometimes you know the subject well, but you are not interested. For example, in that moment, you are not in mood of talking. You are not satisfied. You are not interested in that topic in that moment. So the process of communication will be problematic. So you have to say that we want to postpone this subject to another time or to another moment. So knowing the subject well and also being interested in the subject is very important. If you are not interested, your facial expressions, your body language, your gestures, your looks, your your eye contacts will be problematic, because it shows that, for example, you are tired, you are not interested, you are reluctant to the topic, so the process of communication will be a problem. The other characteristics of a good sender is that to know the audience members and to establish a rapport with them. Knowing the audience, being mastered in audience studies or audienceology, it is very important to know the audience, the needs of the audience that previously we mentioned, and the members of the audience. It is very important. Look, we are talking generally about all kinds of senders. Sometimes the sender is a person, is a human being like me and you, okay, and you have to know the subject, you have to be master. Sometimes the sender is, for example, a box. For example, in the TV channel, it is a box that you have to, for example, this is a receiver, this is a material thing, okay? This is good, this is a facility, okay? In that case, also as a matter of fact, the sender must be appropriate according to the receiver, and to know, and as a matter of fact, to be applicable and to be appropriate with the kind of the receiver that it has, okay? So the audience members, the sender must be known with the audience members. The other point about sender is that to know that they have to speak at the level of the receiver. They have to speak at the level of the receiver. For example, if your audience is the audience or the members or the students at the level of PhD, so if you talk to them at the level of BA or MA, so they wouldn't be interested, or they will be tired soon. And vice versa, if your audiences are, for example, BA students, associate degree students, or undergraduate, or etc., if you talk to them at the level of PhD, you use some terms and expressions or jargons which are not appropriate for them. So this will be a dilemma, and you cannot come out of this situation unless you destroy the process of communication. The other characteristics of a good sender is that the sender choose the appropriate communication channel. The channel that you choose to transfer your message must be very, for example, concise and relevant to the addressee. For example, when you are talking, when your audience are a group of children, or for example in the kindergarten, okay, you have to use different channels of communication. For example, different colors. Colors are channels by themselves. By the form of the colors, you transfer some messages. Okay, red, green, white, for example. This is a kind of message. For example, if you are talking to a group of sophisticated group, for example, you have to use, for example, Prezi presentation, PowerPoint, PPT, for example, or use whiteboard, blackboard. This kind is not appropriate to the kindergarten students and to the, for example, very young students. And those which are used in the kindergarten are not suitable for the, for example, sophisticated and, for example, professors and etc. When you are talking to a friend, for example, you use, I don't know, different types of channels like cell phone, like, I don't know, tablet, computer, PC, internet, and etc. So these are different channels. According to the receiver and according to the audience, you have to choose different types of channels. Now, up to now we have talked about actually the characteristics of a good sender and the characteristics of a good message. Now it is the time to talk about the characteristics of a good channel. If you remember, we said that there are different elements for the process of communication: sender, receiver, message, channel, feedback, and etc. Okay, we talked about the sender and the message. Now the best channel is a channel that must have different, as a matter of fact, different characteristics. So we talked about the first two elements of communication. A good channel must have three characteristics. First, appropriate. Second, affordable. Third, appealing. A good channel is a channel which must be appropriate to the receiver and sender, both sides. For example, I personally, when go to teach, for example, in a university or any center, etc., use the modern facilities, the best facilities which can be interesting to the audience. So I first of all, I assess the audience. For example, I decide that for this type of audience, this type of channel is the best channel. So the channel must be very appropriate and very important, and it must be according to the needs of the both sides of receiver and sender. Secondly, it must be affordable. By affordable mean it must be costly. It must be, as a matter of fact, according to the cost level of the audience. It must be affordable. For example, today, if I use PowerPoint, a projector, for example, PowerPoint, I teach through PowerPoint, it is much more cheaper than, for example, the traditional and classical form which I send the class materials in the form of papers, that all papers must be copied and according to the number of the students of the class, and it was costly and it was expensive to the, for example, to the school or to the university. But using one technique, one facility, one instrument can solve many problems, because I have chosen the best form of the channel. So appropriate, affordable, and also appealing. The form that the channel that you choose must be appealing, interesting to the audience. Okay, for example, today, okay, Vibering, WhatsApping, I don't know, using different types, Telegramming and Skyping, Uvoing, or etc. These are the best channels that you can communicate with the people who are at the other part of the world, and this is very appealing for them. When you talk to them and in the way of, for example, via Viber, they are not interested to go and check their email, for example, or they are not interested at all in sending you hard copy letters, for example, sending you a letter by going to post station, sending you a letter which takes weeks or months to reach to you. Just by clicking a button, okay, he or she sends a message, okay, and instantly and very immediate after that sending, they will get the message and their feedback, and also it will be very interesting. So there must be triple A's in channel characteristics. Triple A means appropriate, first A, second A affordable, and then appealing. These are the characteristics of a good channel. Now it is the turn to the receiver. What are the characteristics of a good receiver? Okay, because receiver is one of the elements of the communications, okay, one of the elements of the process of the communication and the circle of the communication. First of all, the receiver must be aware, interested, and willing to accept the message. You know, the receiver must be willingful to accept your message. This is the key point. This is a very crucial for your process of communication. When you send a message, okay, if your receiver is not willing to accept your message, so the process of communication is blocked. There is a barrier here, okay. You have to pave the way, first of all. For example, if you want to talk to a person, you have to pave the way and very indirectly point out to the point that you are going to convey and the transfer. So, being aware of the subject, interested and willing to accept the message. Let me give you another example. For example, SMS. There are some global SMSs and there are some, we can say, intentional or purposeful SMSs. What do I mean? For example, there are some marketing SMSs that are sent to your cell phone and they are just for business, they are for marketing, they are for advertisement, and you are not at all interested to open them and look at the, for example, look at the content and to the text, okay? So you are not interested, you don't like to accept it. You have hundreds of SMSs in your cell phone that you didn't open, and because they are, for example, just for marketing, for business, and you are not interested. But when an SMS is from, for example, your friend, for example, from your father, okay, from your professor, immediately you open and read the text because you are willing for. So which type of the communication is more successful? For sure the second one, that you are willing for to accept. The other characteristics of a good receiver is to listen attentively. This characteristic is very good for those religious psychologists who are giving consultants to who are counseling, for example, the people, or for example on the member, or they are teaching in the class, or for example, you have to be attentively listening to the sender or to the person who are asking the question. Listening by itself is an art, is a skill. If you listen correctly, then you can speak correctly too. If you don't listen, if you just want to go fast forward and you are not in mood of listening, the process of communication will be problematic. So listening attentively here means that it must be dynamic. The process of communication, talking and listening, both of them must be dynamic. The other characteristic is to understand the value of the message. If the receiver doesn't know the value of the message, so the process of communication will be blocked because he or she will reject it. You have to show to the receiver your message at its best form. For example, you are talking about a religious point, a religious as much of a subject. You have to show the importance of this religious message, because normally people, especially in the secular countries, are not that much interested to listen to, for example, religious topics and religious issues. You have to beautify this message. You have to give some colors to your message, to your religious messages, and you have to make it appropriate to the situation of the receiver, according to the needs of the audience, according to the, as a matter of fact, the education of the receiver, and make it important for him or her. In that case, he will understand the value of the message. Okay, there is a hadith from Imam al-Rida alayhi salam that لَوْ عَلَمَ النَّاسِ مَحَاسِنَ كَلَامِنَا لَاتَّبَعُونَا, that if people would understand the beauties of our words and our sentences and our ahadith, surely they will follow us. So what is the point that sometimes people, or even the religious people, do not follow because we didn't show them the beauties of their words? So we have to beautify the words in order to make it important, and the audience can understand the value of the message. And the last point about a good receiver is that to provide the sender with feedback. This is very important. A receiver, if he is interested in the subject, he or she must send feedback. For example, if you, my dear viewers, the dear students, the dear researchers, if you are interested in the subject, please send a feedback. If you are not interested, please again send the feedback that we don't like this way of talking, for example, this way of lecturing. If you have any comment, send the feedback. This way of feedbacking, sending feedbacks and telling the comments, or liking or disliking or unliking, okay, this makes the process of communication very dynamic, and that can be effective and influential for the process of communication. In this session and in our previous session, we talked profoundly about the characteristics of a good communication. We talked about the skills and about the points that the message sender, receiver, and the channel must have. And inshallah, in the upcoming session, we will talk about the communicator, the effective who is the good and effective communicator, inshallah. Up to the next session, and being again with you. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.